He helped develop UCOM's first energy security strategy. He speaks today on the topic of critical materials for energy security. Please welcome Dr. David Diamond.
Thank you for the introduction, Dan, and I also like to thank the NCPA for the opportunity to speak here as part of our ongoing outreach efforts on our strategy. As Dan mentioned, we are in a very interesting and an exciting time with our efforts. We released our initial strategy almost a year ago, and we're now hopefully weeks away from releasing an update to the strategy for 2011. So with that in mind, a lot of the slides I have to present are historical, since our final strategy isn't ready to be released yet. But I think it's all still very relevant, and I'll try to highlight where I can some of the functional areas are where we're going to try to update the strategy and kind of our objectives for 2011 and for our ongoing efforts compared to last year. Now, since this is a national security, this conference is primarily focused on national security, what I wanted to do is before I get into our strategy itself, just give a few slides, just kind of linking critical materials for clean energy technologies, which is what we primarily focus on at DOE within our mandate, and the broader energy security and national security implications. After that, I'll talk about our strategy, the scope, context, our supply, demand, and criticality analysis, and our program and policy directions, and then finish up talking about some of the ongoing steps we're doing over the past year, and as we move forward to our update for 2011. I think that's very interesting as well. So first of all, energy security. There are a number of different definitions. I think one of the best official definitions I've seen is from the IEA. It's the uninterrupted physical availability at a price which is affordable while respecting environmental concerns. Now that relates to oil, gas, nuclear, electricity, but I think clean energy is a key component of that, because it's moving towards renewable, more environmentally friendly sources of energy, and also towards through variety of energy resources you get security, and it touches on the uninterruptibility part, and it also gives the potential for domestic production of renewable energy technologies, which has also been a key component of the administration's economic development objectives as well. So within that context, I think where critical materials for clean energy falls is really in between those circles: energy security, economic security, and natural security. So I just want everybody to keep that in mind as we move forward, and that's helped me kind of frame my presentation for today. Now, what specifically DOE's role in this? I think that energy security and critical materials relates to two of our four goals in our 2011 strategy. One is that timely material and efficient transformation of the energy system towards more renewable and a broader portfolio of energy technologies, including clean energy, and also a vibrant effort in science and engineering. And this relates to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math education, which is something that came across in our strategy as well that I'll touch on. So within that scope, I'll go into our strategy and our analysis. The strategy, we looked at rare earths, and we also looked at a number of other materials that came up in one of the previous questions. In addition to the 17 rare earths, we looked at lithium and cobalt that are used in electric drive vehicle batteries. We also looked at indium, gallium, and tellurium that are used in thin film photovoltaics. And this just goes over the timeline of what we've done. Our Assistant Secretary, David Sandalo, he announced the strategy on March 17th. I started working at DOD on March 16th, so I've literally been involved in this almost since my arrival at DOE last year. We issued a release for information. As I mentioned, we released our initial strategy in December 2010, and then starting this spring, we really, as we move forward to implement it, we also look to begin the cycle of our analysis again with a new RFI and an updated analysis for 2011. There were three strategic pillars that we focused on. One is diversified global supply chains. This gets to diversification as a source of material security and by extrapolation, energy security. Also to develop substitutes where possible, and to reduce, reuse, and recycle the material, the critical materials that are found in the technologies as we go forward. And this is all in the supply chain context, from all the way where you have ability to substitute and recycle, reduce, and reuse, all the way from extraction up to the development of the end-use technology and into the recycling and post-consumer phase. So, for our analysis, we looked at really supply and demand, and which also be potentially better described as production and consumption of rare earths and the other key materials. With respect to rare earths, as most of you know, probably they're not that rare in nature. However, they're usually found in very small quantities. So rare in terms of their economic production. While China does control roughly 95% of the current production, there, as you can see, there are a number of other deposits that are being explored. What makes a lot of these elements interesting, particularly rare earths, is the co-production complications. As was mentioned, you've got co-production of indium, tellurium, and gallium, and even within the rare earths, you've got 17 different co-products, and also potential. They're also produced as a byproduct of iron mining in Baotou. So what that means is your overall economic viability is dependent on not just the price and the importance of one element, but on all the other elements, even the more abundant, particularly the more abundant elements, which you can get and you may not have the most economical use for. So to try to capture supply, we didn't try to reinvent the wheel for any of our analysis, but where as possible rely on government and other credible industry sources to develop our supply projections for current production and estimated 2015 production or production potential. We worked very closely with Dan and a number of other specialists at USGS, as well as other industry sources, in this case for rare earths with Roskill and IMCOA. And the same for the non-rare earth elements, trying to develop credible supplies. And as part of our 2011 estimate, we understand because this all depends on economics and demand, these things are changing, so we're trying to update that for 2011. To develop our demand, our consumption, we didn't try to develop absolute forecasts. Instead, we looked at different trajectories or projections of what could happen over time under very specific assumptions. We developed 4 trajectories, kind of from high to low material demand, and they're based on a number of variables. The first variable, market penetration, is the number of units of a product that use rare earths or other critical materials. So that's for instance, for electric vehicles, the projections for high or low deployment of electric vehicles times essentially the market share of those vehicles that are projected or forecast to use rare earth permanent magnet motors. And then we combine that with the material intensity, which is high and low estimates for average content per vehicle or per megawatt of wind. And so we developed those 4 trajectories from kind of a low to a high assumption. For the sources for the deployment scenarios, we rely primarily on IEA sources, the IEA energy technology perspectives, the World Energy Outlook, and a report on incandescent lighting fades outs and last year, which looked at CFL demand. And this is for the low estimates, we looked at really the base case of these are based on for the electric drive, wind, and PV. It's what would happen based on existing policies with no new national policy initiatives, and for CFL is kind of a low demand forecast. And then in contrast, for a high forecast, it was the different, for electric drive vehicles, what the IEA calls their blue map, and for the other cases, 450 stabilization. That's based on projected demand, assuming that countries take fairly aggressive clean energy policies to reduce carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. And for CFL, more of a corresponding high demand growth. Now, specifically for CFLs was probably the coarsest of the assumptions because there just aren't a lot of, or for fluorescent lighting in general, there are not a lot of detailed bulb by bulb forecasts out there. So this is something we're looking to see if we can get better information on for this year as well. So based on that, this is probably the worst eye chart of the brief right here. What we tried to do, based on based on the RFI responses and kind of our discussions with industry and the available literature, look at high and low material intensity. High intensity is generally what's state of the art now, or what's probably an average of what's used now. Low intensity is what's likely technically feasible over the medium term, out to the medium term, which is, for us, was 2015 out to 2025. And so those were our quantitative inputs. Other things that we looked at qualitatively in context is the supply chain and the complications that creates. You see this is just a basic supply chain for rare earth magnets, and even that's pretty complicated. And also the price, which influences the economics of both the supply and on the supply side and manufacturers' decisions for their current and future generation technologies. I think the price trends Dan covered in his presentation before. One of the things we looked at in addition to just demand is looked at demand in the context, clean energy demand in the context of global demand. By clean energy context, I mean the demand for our four specific applications. Everything else we considered non-clean energy, even though that does include other uses that may also have be energy or even clean energy related. So just the chart for dysprosium last year really illustrates kind of the concern is that currently dysprosium represents less than 20%. Clean energy share of dysprosium is less than 20%, but if you look out under a high deployment scenario out to 2025, it could jump to the majority of use and which would tend to crowd out all the other uses which also have important implications for the economy and compete for that demand economically. So what we did is we combined our supply projections with our forward demand projections and produced a chart for each of the elements I mentioned before. I'll show a couple of these, which may be familiar to a lot of people. And we looked at really the short term from 2010 to 2015, and then the medium term from 2015 to 2025, and trying to even project anything out to 2025 is difficult, so we didn't try to go much past there. As you can see, for neodymium, it's widely used in permanent magnets for both in clean energy and non-clean energy applications. And under the four scenarios, under the low deployment scenarios in blue, you see that it's tight in the short term, but gets better in the medium term as these new mines open up. You see the two of the most. You see the mines by 2015. Under the low trajectory scenarios, the projections are within that forecast supply, and but on the other hand, under the high deployment trajectories, things look a lot tighter. And something that should be emphasized is that where I think you really want to be, or what you really want to be concerned about, is kind of the more the green lines, the high deployment, or particularly the high deployment where with low material intensity. That's saying what happens if you produce vehicles to meet national clean energy goals and reduce your demand as much as possible through improvements in material intensity, where you end up there, and that's that dotted green line. So, but again, these are not predictive, and they represent kind of as kind of the ghost of Christmas future, and what could happen, and give you a basis for what policy initiatives you want to take to try to make any adjustments. Mentioned neodymium for dysprosium, which ended up being essentially our most critical material. See, the picture looks a lot worse. It's tight in the both the short and medium term under just about all the scenarios. And kind of on the flip side, though, for lithium, the situation looks a lot better. There was some talk about peak lithium a number of years ago because of the growing demand for lithium ion and other lithium technology batteries, but there also appears to be a pretty widely available potential sources of supply that could come online if economics dictate it. So currently supply and demand looks like it'll be in balance in 2015 with the potential for new supplies well into the medium term. So with that in mind, these quantitative charts we used as one input into our overall criticality analysis. For this, we didn't try to reinvent the wheel. We used a methodology laid out by the National Academy of Sciences, National Research Council, looking at in their study on critical materials for the economy. We tried to take just a clean energy slice of that, and we looked at two axes, tried to rank the materials on two axes, importance to clean energy on one axis and the risk of supply disruption on the other axis, i.e. how tight will supply and demand get. And you can see the number of factors that went into that. And again, we looked at the short-term and the medium-term time frame. So based on that, we came up with our charts. In the short term, dysprosium all the way up at the right-hand corner, but a number of other rare earths, particularly those used in phosphors, were critical, and in the short term, indium for PVs were also critical. A number of other rare earths were generally medium or low criticality for clean energy technologies. And then you see the elements in green, it looked like were not as critical. So same thing out into the medium term. We see the situation, things shift around and the situation gets slightly better, but still concerns about the four rare earth elements that were critical in the short term. And this was from the 2010 strategy. We are redoing this for next year, so there might be some tweaks to it for next year. But I think overall it's the same factors drive criticality, and sometimes you can get more precise in your estimates without necessarily getting more accurate in your actual supply and demand projections. So just to show the movement that I mentioned before, from you see some things change in multiple dimensions. So with that in mind, what we looked at is okay, given the criticality situation as we see it, what are some program and policy directions that the government could adopt to help reduce material criticality? We identified these ones here, and it should be obvious. Some of them are within DOE's core capabilities and their mandate. Other ones, such as permitting for domestic production and diplomacy, are largely outside of DOE's scope and would have to be done through engagement across the interagency. So with that in mind, what we've kind of focused on, and what I wanted to highlight are some of our two of the things that I feel are really DOE's core competency. The first one is research and development. DOE is the nation's leading funder of R&D, and both on the basic science side of the spectrum through our Office of Science, all the way up through applied technology through our Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office, and more recently really cutting-edge transformative R&D through ARPA-E, which was modeled after the Defense Department's DARPA. And I won't go into the details of all the programs, but there's been there were a number of initiatives. What we did last year is try to capture what the department was doing, and as we move forward to try to align the goals and to try to and then the department's put some more money behind critical materials research in some of these areas, as I'll go through in future slides. And I think the other thing that that may not be as obvious as R&D is education and workforce training. It shows beyond the gathering storm. This is not just for critical materials, but in general, there's been a lot of concern about the ensuring the U.S. remains a dominant player in science and technology development, and a lot of that is both basic education, science training, all the way up through advanced R&D, and that's something I had the pleasure to go out to Ames Lab a couple weeks ago, and I talked to, which is one of the leading U.S. DOE rare earth centers, and something they mentioned is that it's really succession planning all along the chain. It's been said that China has thousands of rare earth professionals, the U.S. has dozens of rare earth professionals, and a lot of them have been doing it a long time, and it's at every stage from the the high school students starting to study, getting them interested in science and technology, to undergrads getting the requisite skills, all the way up to postdocs and really full tenured researchers who can devote their entire career to this. That's something we emphasized in last year's strategy, and it's a thread we feel we can pull a little bit more in this year's strategy. Along with R&D, we've had a number of workshops. A lot of these occurred at the end of last year, and one of them, the most recent, was a trilateral R&D workshop with Japan and the EU that occurred just last month. So the conclusions of our strategy was that the 5 risks that I mentioned were at supply risk in the short term. Clean energy's share of material use is small, but as we show with dysprosium, it could grow significantly. And because of a number of factors, the co-production and the factors that are obstacles to developing new mines and obstacles to rapid substitution on the demand side, demand doesn't necessarily respond quickly when supply and demand don't necessarily respond quickly to rapid changes in price. Other conclusions: the data are sparse, has been highlighted by a number of the speakers and questions, and that there are sound policies and strategic investments that we feel that can reduce risk. So that was the historical part of the strategy. What are we doing now, and what have we been doing since last December? Identified a number of best next steps in developing an integrated research plan. It says building on the 3 workshops from last year. It's actually, I think, up to 5 now. Strengthen information gathering, both within DOE and by working with our interagency and industry partners. Analyze additional technologies for next year, and continuing to work closely with all the stakeholders. And as I mentioned, updating the strategy, hopefully by fall, keeping in mind that the meteorological fall goes all the way into December. So as part of that, I mentioned we released another RFI. These were the topics to give you an idea of some of what we were looking to focus on. Drill down more into supply chain, the refining material content estimates, looking at emerging technologies, recycling, mining and processing permitting, and looking what else industry thought we should be, and stakeholders thought we should be focused on. And we got a lot of responses, as we did for our first RFI. Some of the responders are actually in the audience now, and we appreciate everyone's candor and willingness to share information with us. Mentioned the R&D plan. This is really where we're going. It's really focused around all the way from the supply to the demand side. On the demand side, you see the permanent magnets, catalyst separators, and lighting phosphors are all important technologies that need to be addressed. And we've taken steps to put some money behind that. Just in the past year, we've had 3 solicitations for over $40 million from ERE and ARPA-E that have addressed, that have specifically addressed rare earths. ARPA-E just, they just picked the proposals to fund for their REACT solicitation, which looked at reducing rare earth content in magnets and looking at alternative motor technologies and a number of other potentials to reduce rare earth content. And also DOE also has an ongoing LED lighting program that's that looks into LEDs, which are a potential substitute for rare earths and fluorescent lighting. And lastly, in the 2012 budget submission, DOE included $20 million for a critical materials innovation hub, and obviously the 2012 budget is still in flux, but it was in our submission for last year. So I wanted to touch a little bit on the U.S.-Japan workshop. This is kind of the culmination of some of the other workshops we've had, looking at strategic implications of global storage shortages, and some of the major topics: reducing neodymium, dysprosium, and magnets, component level substitution, technology recycling, and I think the materials and processing for environmentally sound and sustainable separation and processing. This is something I think it's an important area also. There hasn't been a lot of R&D focused on there, but it's probably an area that's I think ripe for transformative technology innovation. And lastly, I wanted to touch on what we've been doing to kind of work some of the broader policy options within the interagency. The Office of Science and Technology Policy has been the lead on kind of a coordinated interagency effort, and they've brought in DOE, DOD, and a number of other stakeholders, and they stood up an interagency working group addressing the critical and strategic mineral supply chains. It's looked on mineral prioritization and early warning mechanisms, not just in clean energy or defense, but in across the broader economy, looking at R&D prioritization of efforts throughout the interagency, responsible supply chains, which gets into environmentally sound separation and processing, and also transparency of information, both on supply and demand and on the broader market across the supply chain. So that's really what's going on, and I look forward to being able to, we look forward to announcing the release of our updated strategy shortly, and with that, I'll be happy to take a few questions.
Yes. You mentioned, I know the administration has a big push for green energy technology, and so did the previous administration. But from an energy security perspective, why, I always hear we need the whole bundle, we need the whole basket of technologies. Why is that from an energy security perspective? If we have a couple hundred years worth of coal, we have a growing natural gas resource with shale production, and we have oil if we'll just access it, though certainly not enough to replace imports, still quite a bit. Why do we push technologies that make us more dependent upon one country, which don't actually increase our energy security? If it's for environmental reasons, I'm not overly concerned about greenhouse gases, but if it is, aren't there better ways that don't compromise our security, such as if you want to go with clean coal, if you want to find scrubbers that don't focus on coal but just take carbon out of the atmosphere? Why don't we put our resources into that and less into technologies, wind, solar, others that require these very critical minerals that are useful for other purposes?
That's a very valid question. I think it's a little bit outside the kind of scope of the presentation and and kind of my leeway as a departmental official to respond to that. Although I would comment on a couple things. I think though that it is. I mean, our role in this has been supporting the I guess the stated goal of the administration. And in the stated, one of the 4 stated mission areas of DOE, really to assist in the market transformation of, let's see here. Yeah, just to assist in the transformation of the energy system, and I think that's something that that the projections from the IEA show. It's something that it's a debate that's going on, and it's a transformation that's occurring not just in the U.S. but among a number of other countries, and it's also been along the lines of the blueprint for the energy security future. The administration's incorporated clean energy technology as an development as a component of our national economic development as well. So I mean, also I think, but within that, I think what we have looked to do is address like critical materials from the standpoint of what are the risks for dependence, the risk both on a single supplier and on just the risks of general global supply and demand considerations, and looked at what we can do so that as we continue to pursue clean energy development, that as much as possible to not let critical materials be an obstacle to that. I hope that answers your question as much as possible.
Dr. Diamond, thanks very much. I know you have time constraints. We appreciate your coming.
Sure.
And thank you for the material and the presentation. Appreciate that.